Hello, I'm Andy Agathangelo. I'm the founder of Campaign Group Transparency Task Force. We are a UK-based but very international certified social enterprise. We have a formal mission, which is to promote reform of the financial sector so it serves society better. We do believe that the financial industry is profoundly important to the well-being of society, to economic stability, and from economic stability to political stability too. So it won't come as any surprise to you, given our focus, that the topic of illicit money flows is an issue that we consider to be of enormous importance. The Transparency Task Force was set up in 2015, so we've survived for about 10 years, and we are becoming increasingly active in areas that I would describe as being about trying to combat corruption, collusion, cover-up. Over the 10-year journey that I've been on, I've been learning more and more, unfortunately, about the role that the UK plays in the international activity of moving dirty money around. And I'm beginning to properly understand how some of that goes back to our colonial past, about how offshore tax jurisdictions were developed as the British Empire collapsed or changed, and how this all created the need for new revenue streams that were not particularly fussy about the extent to which the activity behind those revenue streams was honest, ethical, transparent. In very, very broad terms, the Transparency Task Force is about the idea that sunlight is the best disinfectant. There are many parts of the system, the financial ecosystem, I guess I'm thinking about, that really do need big doses of sunshine to get rid of a lot of infection. And when you start to understand and examine the issues behind all of this stuff, I personally find myself coming back to what I describe as the unholy trinity on many occasions. What do I mean by the unholy trinity? It's my little phrase to capture three issues that I think are root causes of many of the problems that we deal with, talk about, and encounter. The first of these is the revolving door problem. The revolving door problem creates the second of these, conflicts of interest. If people are 1 minute regulating an entity and the next minute working for one of those firms that you were once regulating, it's very, very obvious that people end up with split loyalties and conflicts of interest. That then takes us into the space of regulatory capture, the idea that regulators are torn between, again, conflicting loyalties. And I say all this as somebody who is absolutely sure that one of the reasons why there still is a war on dirty money is because the authorities that ought to be cleaning this dirty money up aren't focused on doing so. And why aren't they focused on doing so? Well, is it because, ladies and gentlemen, the enablers behind this dirty money activity, by which I mean perhaps, good word perhaps, you can throw it at the beginning of many sentences, perhaps the law firms, the accountancy firm, the professional services firms that actually benefit hugely from all kinds of creations of all kinds of special purpose vehicles and other such things, might actually be benefiting from this dirty trade. And one then wonders about the extent to which such organizations have a position of power and influence in the financial ecosystem themselves, perhaps to the extent, there's that perhaps word again, that they're able to influence policy making and the work of politicians and even the media. I'll leave all those ideas hanging. But what I won't leave hanging is the simple, harsh reality that we are not talking about something which is purely some kind of academic, abstract notion of dirty money. We really are talking about huge amounts of money generated illegally, involving some, if not many, if not even all, of the most grotesque activities imaginable. And this does not manifest in victimless crimes. It manifests in the kind of crimes that cause people's lives to be completely and utterly shattered. Roughly 3 hours ago, I was close to tears talking to a gentleman as well as a gentleman, who had lost a very substantial amount of money, not just substantial in terms of it being the actual absolute amount of money, and we are talking a lot, but also a huge amount of money in terms of this person's total net worth. Basically, he lost all his money coming up to retirement as a consequence of criminal activity, the kind of thing we're going to be talking about tonight. As some of you may know, the sad story of Ian Davis. Ian Davis, a former Transparency Task Force volunteer who lost pretty much all his life savings as he was approaching retirement, and through the frustration of trying to get the authorities to take the action they should have taken to hunt down the criminals and the perpetrators, Ian Davis quite literally lost the will to live and took his own life. What a sad thing that was. His funeral was the saddest day of my life. I'll never ever forget it. And it's since motivated me to do all I possibly can to try to make a difference, to try to mitigate the risk or the probability of people becoming victims of financial crime moving forward, but also to try to do something to get our systems to better protect and look after those poor folk who have become the victims of the kind of financial crime we're talking about. So what do we know? Well, I guess we know a few things about this. We know that it's real. We know that it's complicated. We know that it's about greed and about a certain type of evil. I'm not exaggerating, a certain type of evil. We know that it's a bit of a conundrum to the authorities. We know that the authorities are spending far too little time, money, resource trying to tackle it. We know that fraud and financial crime and this kind of thing is so substantial that the chances of people being caught, locked up, imprisoned is pretty remote. So if you wanted a very highly paid job, which is illegal, but probably going to make you very, very rich, the message is you'll probably get away with it if you start getting involved in dirty money. So as a society and as a community, we've got a choice. The choice is very simple. Do we stand up or do we stand by? And for decades, the UK in particular has been standing by, and we're paying the price for it. Because if you let this thing happen and continue to happen, you're dealing with an infection, if I can call it that, that's getting worse and worse and worse, more and more serious, more and more intense, more and more difficult to deal with. I am ever so pleased that tonight we have Nicholas Gilmore and Tristram Hicks with us. They have a tremendous amount of subject matter expertise on this remarkably important topic, the war on dirty money. What a great title. That really does sum up just how serious this damn issue is. The war on dirty money. In just a moment, I'll be passing to Nicholas, who'll then speak and then pass over to Tristram. I'll be interjecting every now and then. And once Nicholas and Tristram have shared with us what they'd like to share with us, we'll open it up and have a very candid conversation amongst adults about where we are, how we got here, but most importantly, what to do moving forward. Can I please invite everybody here from wherever you are in the world to put your hands together and show our appreciation to Nicholas and Tristram for their book and for being with us tonight and for being willing to share their expertise. Thank you very much indeed, everybody. Nicholas, over to you, sir. Thank you so much for being here. Please do tell everybody a bit about yourself, your background, how the book came about, and take it wherever you'd like to. Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Andy. It's a pleasure to be here and talk to you all. I know Tristram and I have done these talks on many occasions, and it's always nice to talk about the book because the book has a long history, really. I'm a former police officer in the UK and in New Zealand. I worked in intelligence and financial investigations. I was some time I've been an academic during that, so I've got quite a mix. But really, if I talk about the book is the book of The War on Dirty Money is largely a result of working in this space and seeing the same thing happen over and over and over again. Tristram, with his decades of experience in policing, and really me working in policing and academia, we both kept noticing a mismatch between the effort and the result. A mismatch we documented in 2009 when we sat together over a cup of tea to discuss research topics for my doctorate, which ended up being really a series of research questions still being unanswered in 2021 when we began writing this book, or at least looking for chapters to put together in the book. And everywhere you look, you see dedicated professionals, new regulations, huge compliance departments, advances in technology, but the system, the process, it's all terribly busy. And yet the dirty money, as we know, keeps flowing. So just to give you a sense of scale, globally, we spend over 200 billion US dollars a year fighting dirty money. But here's the reality. In most cases, criminals keep their profits. Even when they are caught and convicted, in about 80% of countries, the assets are not confiscated. So part of the problem is clearly structural. On the one side, you have the well-funded prevention, the banks, the compliance teams, the regulators, the complete AML compliance sector. And in response, they generate millions of suspicious activity reports every year. On the other side, you have underfunded enforcement, the police, the investigators, and prosecutors. Both sides are crucial, but they barely talk to one another. They have different goals, different incentives, and even a different language. So what happens? Well, the prevention side churns out endless reports, but the enforcement side is unable to process them all. But nevertheless, banks continue to be fined billions, which makes a great media headline. But it's not the shareholders who pay the fines, it's the customers, the people like you and me. And then we have technology. Incredible systems now exist, but it's easy for them to flag suspicious transactions instantly. But if those alerts are just piled onto already overstretched investigators, we have to ask the question, do they end up being pointless? And that's the frustration, really. But there is hope. And really, this is at the heart of the book. Our intention when we wrote the book was not to simply destroy decades of hard work, but to add to a new perspective, raise new opportunities, and essentially give some hope. We wanted to force new discussion on the problem of dirty money. So the book is a critical assessment. and we've tried to show where the system is broken and equally how it can be fixed. That's why the book is really a book of solutions, over 100 workable solutions. At the end of each chapter, we intentionally included key takeaway points for the reader to consider, things that they could actually apply in their own practice. The scope of the book is quite broad, as those that have read it will notice, because we noted how money laundering seems to touch everything, but we chose to split the book in such a way that matched our own experiences, our ideas, our frustrations, and the things that annoyed us, enough that we wanted to really put pen to paper. And throughout, we made sure the focus was on encouraging positive change. We didn't want to write something that leaves the reader gloomy, thinking nothing can ever improve, despite how it might seem when we talk on the stage at conferences. We wanted to show that there was a way forward, even if that means accepting some ideas have not worked, and that sometimes we really got it wrong. We also made a point of showing failures from top to bottom. It's not about blaming a particular group. We started with the Financial Action Task Force, and we traced the weaknesses right through the system: international bodies, national governments, regulators, banks, and even law enforcement. Everyone has a role, and they know how things go wrong. So we believe everyone has a role in making it better. So what does better look like to us? Well, let's capture a few of those things. We think we need to measure what matters. Right now, the global system measures activity, how many reports and how many fines. But that doesn't tell us if the criminals are losing the money. What really counts is asset recovery. How much dirty money has been taken away, and how did it really hurt the criminal? We need to use clearer language. The old placement, layering, and integration model is outdated. It doesn't still reflect the reality, and in many cases, it confuses people. The UN has already given a clear definition, and as we write in the book, we think people should use it. And we can learn from success, and Tristan will talk about some of these, because in Ireland, the UK, Kenya, there are examples of where prevention and enforcement do work together and the results are real. Let us copy them. And we need to rethink technology, because technology forms part of quite a bit of the book and quite a bit of the problem in terms of dealing with the war on dirty money. Instead of drowning in red flags, let us instead build systems that stop dirty money getting into the financial system into the first place. And here is something we want to stress. This is not a blame game. We are not blaming anybody. The professionals in the field are often very brilliant. We have seen their dedication firsthand, compliance officers who really care, investigators working impossible hours on complicated cases. The problem is not them, it's the design of the system. And because it's a design problem, it can be changed. Why does this matter so much, you might ask? Because dirty money is not about balance sheets or compliance forms. It's what fuels organised crime, corruption, human trafficking, environmental destruction, terrorism, and a lot more. Cut off the money, and you don't just punish one criminal, you actually weaken the entire network behind them. And if we can recover even a fraction of that money, it can go back into things that make society stronger: education, healthcare, clean water, and basic infrastructure. So that's really the spirit of the war on dirty money. It was our attempt to say clearly why the current system is not working, but more importantly, to show how it can be fixed. Not with endless new rules, not with bigger fines, not with technology based on decades of old understanding, but with alignment, clarity, collaboration, and above all, a focus on outcomes. And if we do that, then we do not have to be in an endless war. It is a fight we can win. And a follow-up book titled The Failed War on Dirty Money that Tristan and I no longer need to write.
Very well said. Just before we go to Tristan, can I just thank you, Nicholas, for opening the conversation up in that way? It's a positive and hopeful and optimistic perspective that we can actually win this war, and that's a great way to start the conversation. I love the way that you've described how the book's effectively a kind of instruction manual on 100 or so things that can be done to make a difference. The question is whether the system is sufficiently motivated to do the very things that can be done. And that's perhaps the dilemma. We'll find out, won't we, in due course, because we'll find out whether they do or don't do the things that they ought to do. Brilliant start for us, Nicholas. Thank you very much indeed. Tristram, over to you, sir. Over to you.
Great. Thanks very much, firstly, for the opportunity and the introduction, which was quite sobering. Nick has given a positive side to this, and I'm going to add some more positivity, really. My background was built on the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002, which is a UK piece of legislation. And at the time, I was the head of financial intelligence at Scotland Yard, and I was in operational command of the Met Police's financial investigators. And suddenly, everything changed. I can't emphasize enough what a revolutionary piece of legislation the Proceeds of Crime Act was. Before that, all the convicted criminals kept all the money. And in a way, I'll just say that again, all the convicted criminals kept the money because no one was doing the financial investigation. We couldn't make the confiscation work because the legislation was too clunky. No one was asking us to do financial investigation. The financial intelligence didn't connect with the financial investigators. And suddenly POCA changed everything. And the reality was that in the decade before the Proceeds of Crime came in, all the agencies of the UK put together collected about £15 million a year on average. And in the decade after POCA, it was 230 million per year. So suddenly we went from a few dozen cases involving hundreds of millions to thousands of money laundering cases involving hundreds of millions. And that continued for the first 10 years. Every year was a record-breaking year. We doubled the amount of asset recovery 18 months during that first decade. And we created things that hadn't been created before, the concept of parallel investigation. We have a criminal investigator and a financial investigator working in parallel, one looking at the assets and the other looking at the type of crime. We created this profession of accredited financial investigators, a unique British invention under statute where all the investigators in all the agencies are trained to the same standard and have a professional development program as they continue to be financial investigators. And this created something which broke down the silos. So we had people who were financial investigators first and police officers second, or customs officers second, or revenue second, or trading standards, or whatever it was. And that was a way that our professionals, this newly created profession, could talk to each other across agencies about the subject of the proceeds of crime, which was a brand new idea. We just didn't do it before because the legislation didn't work. And I think there's something there about that learning in that first decade, steered by a national committee. I was a member of that national committee for 10 years. Multi-agency, trying to make this work. We made mistakes. We didn't understand how our own system worked. But we worked through the mistakes in a positive way, and the result was success. And at the same time, acquisitive crime rates were falling. Now, there hasn't been enough academic research into this topic about the connection between asset recovery. Does it work? Does crime pay? Actually, there's very little empirical research on this topic at all. And there's a call out now, ends on the 30th of September, by the National Crime Agency, looking for academics to bid for research topics which have been set out by the NCA. And I welcome that kind of research. There is not enough of it in the past to show whether all this works. We know we worked hard, thousands of people, both in law enforcement and in the compliance industry, hundreds of thousands of people in the compliance industry are trying their best, but does it deliver? And there's the thing. I do think that the financial sector doesn't get justice from the governments. The governments don't invest in financial investigators. They don't make it a priority. We're still approaching all kinds of crime with a 19th century idea of putting people in prison and not following the money. And that follows through all of our thinking. We've separated crime from the proceeds of crime. And the result is we don't have enough people working on the proceeds of crime compared to crime. And this is why in the UK we have 40% of crimes are frauds and we have 1% of policing working on it. Well, this is because we've put economic crime in a separate category. And as soon as you put the word economic in front of crime, then it doesn't strengthen the argument, it weakens it. Because you lose the law enforcement audience. They're not interested actually in financial crime and economic crime. They're interested in crime. If you can show them that financial investigation can solve all of these predicate crimes, all of the 21 crimes listed by the Financial Action Task Force, then you can use this technique to address all those crimes we were talking about before. Environmental crimes and robbery and burglary, and the avalanche of shoplifting, organised shoplifting, which is plaguing the UK at the moment. Yeah. All of these are susceptible to the proceeds of crime and financial investigation. And there's not enough being said about that connection. I left that committee in 2012 when I left the police, and I then went around the world selling British expertise, financial investigation, strategic methods to make agencies work better together. And at the same time, I feel that the UK was losing its way and unpicking some of the work of the Proceeds of Crime Act that had been so good in the first 10 years. We kind of lost our way. I just want to touch a little bit on corruption because obviously that's of huge interest to you. And the countries I was visiting were very interested in corruption. The trouble was they wanted to have their first corruption case against a minister in the government, or maybe the president or their prime minister or the minister of finance. And that was going to be their first ever case. And I was saying, well, I know you want to do this, but actually this is a mountain to climb and you need to start with some foothills. You need to start with ordinary criminals. If you can take the assets off them and make your judges and your investigators and your prosecutors understand how the law works, then if you are robust over a period of time, then you'll be able to take out more serious criminals, international criminals, or maybe corruption targets, which are, of course, the most difficult of targets. And I'd like to cite Kenya. When I first visited them in 2010, they were at the very beginning of that journey. And they hadn't investigated anyone for corruption. They'd never convicted anyone for corruption. They'd never done any asset recovery. And now they are convicting people for corruption. They are taking the assets back and they are restoring those assets to the community, real, tangible casework. It can be done. And Kenya will be the first to say, well, we've got problems with corruption, but actually they got successful cases. And that's because they had experts helping them to understand their own system. And they introduced the kind of legal weapons available from the Proceeds of Crime Act. Is there more to say? Just in summary, I guess, from me, the way that we approach crime is by crime type. It's a whack-a-mole approach. We look at the crimes that are the most fashionable, the most concerning perhaps politically, and we put our resources into solving those crimes. And we solve that crime through a large amount of resource, expensively and wastefully applied. And then while we were doing that, another crime type crops up. And my view is that if we invested in financial investigation, then we would move from a whack-a-mole approach to crime, which can never win, will always be behind the criminals, to something which follows the money. And if we follow the money, then we can follow it to the predicate crime, and then we can bring our crime investigators, our experts in that particular crime, to bear, led by financial investigation, led by financial intelligence from the financial sector, which is currently not getting to the end user in criminal justice. That's my piece.
Wow. Really powerful stuff, Tristram and Nicholas. Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen. Oh, if I may, guys, I'll ask a few questions to get your thoughts on the particular issues I'm raising. First of all, are you guys being listened to? Here we are listening to you talking in a very clear and compelling way about what could and should be done. Are governments around the world actively listening to yourselves and people like you to change what's going on to help win the war on dirty money? Or do you sometimes feel as though you're being ignored? What are your thoughts about that?
Shall I lead, Nick?
Yeah. Yep.
We say in the book that we think the book won't go out of date. It was published in 2023, and here we are a couple of years later. The feedback we've had is very positive, but it's mostly on the lines of, we're so glad you were brave enough to write that. And yes, I have been listened to, and I've been listened to by UK law enforcement. I was at their organised crime seminar last year, and Nick and I have all done podcasts, both done podcasts all over the world. So yes, we're being listened to. And I sense that the FATF, of whom I'm a fan, and I keep saying I'm a fan, is moving slowly in the right direction. For example, they are changing their methodology to make it less of a snapshot and more of a look at illicit financial flows, which is one of the things we said in the book, that the evaluation process misses opportunities, and they are moving in the right direction, just way too slowly. And it is a disappointment to me that the success of the UK, the success of the Proceeds of Crime Act, hasn't been translated into international thinking. And that's partly because it's not being sold by the UK as a success. And I don't really know why.
That's really interesting. One wonders why the UK isn't sort of shouting from the hilltops about the thought leadership in this topic area. Thank you, Tristram. Nick, what about yourself? What do you think on that?
I think we need to remember that we're actually trying to move an extremely large oil tanker here. And we all know what happens when you try and move an oil tanker. It's a very slow process.
Mm.
And like Tristram says, we have been listened to by people around the world, and you do see similar terminology being used in policy documents and discussions from people in the UK and other places that's very familiar, not quite plagiarism, but very familiar with the language we used in the book. So you do get this, as authors, and I speak for Tristram here, a sense of positive feeling that actually people have listened to you and are starting to and willing to also put pen to paper. But equally, I think the captain on the ship, on the oil tanker, has still got his fingers in his ears, or she, because whilst the rest of the crew are shouting and screaming, they've got a job to do, and that job is quite particular. And I think until that job is forced to change, until the instructions are moved to a different port and collect the oil from somewhere else, then I think that oil tanker's on its course for quite a while, unfortunately.
Nick, thank you very much indeed. If I may, I'd like to talk about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The reason for doing so is I've always kept a pretty close eye on what I believe to be the very good work of Tom Tugendhat, MBE VR MP, who Transparency Task Force knows and has known for years. for a long time, Tom has been very focused on this issue of dirty money, illicit money flows. And I remember reading some work he did a while ago. Basically, the message I was getting from that area was when Russia invaded Ukraine, the UK's attitude to dodgy Russian money seemed to change. Now, that may be a perception, or it may be a reality. It is as if the UK was saying it is no longer acceptable for huge amounts of dirty Russian money to flood London and the London property market now that Ukraine's at war with Russia. And I'm wondering about the extent to which these massive geopolitical developments like the Russian-Ukrainian war seem to influence what happens on the world stage as far as illicit money is concerned. Because to my mind, it almost speaks to what I touched on earlier, this fear that there's almost a tacit acceptance that it is the way that it is. It's been that way for many decades, and lots of professional organizations and enablers are somehow benefiting off this, and therefore there's a conflict of interest in the system about whether to or not to really fight back. Nick, any thoughts on that? And of course, we'll ask for Twister for his thoughts on this as well. Gentlemen, what do you think?
Well, there's probably a half a dozen PhDs just in that short statement that you've mentioned. But if we break it into 2 points, one is the geopolitical events that take place. For me, I see them as having some sort of influence, but I see that influence being because we seem to be happy to give dirty money a label. We give it a label that it's either Russian dirty money, or it's money coming out of China, or it's Colombian dirty money. And as a result, we have an incident that happens and everybody reacts through sanctions and waving of the finger and shaking of the head. And then suddenly that dirty money appears to stop. Well, actually, dirty money just continues around the world, and we just seem to have labelled it too quickly, whether that's because it matches a typology, whether it matches a crime type, whether it's linked to an individual or a group of people. But actually, you need to remember that dirty money is money that comes from criminal activities. Most of the time, we can't spot it, because really, this leads into the second part, really, when you look at dirty money, it's everywhere. And it's essentially making the world go round. And from that point, yes, you're right, there are probably incidents, and you have to be walking around with your eyes closed and your fingers in your ears and not willing to talk about it. But really, there are people in society and organizations in society which are, as a result of their normal behaviors, facilitating the movement of dirty money, whether it's an aspect of the laundering process, or whether it's something different, whether it's the housing of it, whether it's the allowing it to be spent. Because if we take it back to AML compliance, in many cases, the banks were lumbered with that because they were seen many years ago as the first point of call to be able to stop illicit money, dirty money, being introduced into the legitimate financial system. So the banks were lumbered with something that they never wanted to do. And for the last 30 years, they've continued to do something which is not really their role. Their job is to make money for their shareholders. It's to lend money out to you and borrow money from you at different rates. So all they're interested in is being a bank. You bring in lawyers and accountants and real estate agents, for example, under tranche 2. And equally, their focus are lawyers to do lawyers type work and accountants to do accountancy type work. The real estate agents, they just want to buy and sell houses. It's all about commission. So you're asking people who are not necessarily interested in a topic to do it. So as a result, there are instances where it can appear they turned a blind eye. They were happy to allow it to happen. And yes, there are incidents where the legal firms, the legal organizations of the country, the regulatory bodies, or the should we say, the overarching bodies of law, of legal professionals will have lobbied governments to say, you must not regulate us, we can self-regulate ourselves quite nicely. And that's because of their self-interest. It's not because they don't want to stop money laundering. It's not because they don't necessarily want to stop crime. It's because it's not their primary job. And I fear that we don't look at this as clearly as we should. We don't actually separate them. We seem to point the finger at the wrong people sometimes, not understanding actually what is their job and their commitment and their requirement. And really, when you look at AML compliance legislation, wherever it is around the world, and it all comes down from FATF through their recommendations, but in many cases, it's lumbered upon these professional sectors, including the banks, all the way down. And the reality is that those regulations don't actually stop the criminal. So they're spending millions and millions and committing huge amounts of resources to doing something which the criminal is just basically laughing at and working round.
That's such a great set of comments, Nick. If I had to paraphrase what you just said in just a sentence or two, it would be basically that there are people in the system who could and frankly should do a better job in helping to win this fight against dirty money, but in some way they're incentivized to not try as hard as they could. And as a consequence, they go through the motions. It's my phrase, not yours, I recognize that. They go through the motions, do what they need to do, but their heart and soul isn't really in it because somebody somewhere, either directly or indirectly connected to them, is benefiting from the status quo. Is that broadly speaking, is that a fair summary of what you just said?
Yeah, they're benefiting, but just remember, not everybody's happy to benefit from criminal activities that they've not necessarily been fully committed to stopping.
Yeah.
If you take the actual understanding of money laundering to the individual on the street, to the accountant, to the lawyer, to the real estate agent, to the member in the bank, and you actually say to them, I'm going to sit down with you for 5 minutes. I want you to explain in the simple terms, what is money laundering to me and how can you stop it? The majority of people will look at you with a glazed look and think, and they'll stumble because the clarity is not there right down to the ground level where people understand it. And it's exactly the same when it comes to law enforcement. This is quite a complicated subject to discuss with these people, but we are expecting up to 20 million people globally to take a role in AML compliance. I would say 19 million of those would struggle to explain just what money laundering is.
This is fascinating stuff. Nick, thank you so much. Tristram, your thoughts on this topic area. Thank you.
Wow.
Well,
I want to talk about people rather than money. And there's an idea that you can accept dirty money from corrupt regimes without being corrupted by the people who are supplying you with that money. Because the people come too. Because the people come and live in your country, particularly when you've opened the Golden Visa scheme in 2008 and let it run till 2022 with no apparent research, with no apparent controls. We didn't even at first actually make sure that the money arrived, which was an extraordinary gap in terms of compliance. So you could basically show that you had some money on a particular date and you didn't have to invest it. You just had to show that you had that money. So there's an idea that people are separated from this corrupt money, and it's just not the case. The other thing is that we're trying to regulate criminals and criminality with our approach. And in my experience from a police perspective, that's not something that works. You can't regulate criminals and their money. You have to investigate them and prosecute them and do the asset recovery and do the hard stuff. If you're trying to regulate, then it simply doesn't work. And if you look at how Companies House this glaring gap in our defences and look at how we've approached it and how we can change the regulations. And we had a big consultation which took years. And now we've got this idea that we're going to start doing checks after 20 years or more of this gap in our defences. I mean, it's just ridiculous, to be honest. And you cannot regulate criminals, is the overview. We should have put criminal investigators into Companies House to look at companies that were being formed and registered before we start to try and regulate them. Our approach was very, ineffective. And the work of Graham Barrow shows us on a regular basis how ineffective it is. And this is a general approach that we're looking at regulation rather than criminal enforcement. And the same approach goes with fining banks.
Christian, thank you so much. And you've mentioned Companies House. I didn't know that you were going to mention Companies House, but I'm not particularly surprised it's come up in today's conversation for reasons you just hinted at. I'm going to share my screen, folks, to play you all, if I can, a short clip. Some of you may have seen this before. I'll set the scene. Can you see my screen okay, folks? Yeah, there's cheers. There's a comedy program. It's actually really good. I highly recommend it. A comedy program called The Outlaws. And just to sort of explain the context so that you understand what you're about to see and hear. The Outlaws are a bunch of interesting characters who, for reasons I won't spoil the program for you, decide that they need to acquire a lot of money very quickly. And they decide that they're going to get involved with some criminal activity. Okay? And what you're about to see, the clip just lasts about 40 seconds. What you're about to see is a conversation which is actually quite funny, but in actual fact, the fact that this topic that you're about to watch and hear found its way into mainstream British comedy just goes to show how big a problem Companies House has been. This is quite old, but fundamentally it really hasn't changed, and I'll talk more about that point in a moment. So I'll press play. I do hope you can all hear it, and let's hope you can. Bear with me. That's not the piece I was going to show you. Well, I'll tell you what, I've got a bit of a technical glitch. I'm going to come back to that in just a. I'm going to come back to that in a second because I've got a technical glitch. What we're going to do is we're going to go to some folks who I think are going to want to chip into the conversation. Mr. David Escott, I'm going to go to you first of all, sir. I've got a feeling you may want to chip into this conversation. David, would you like to take yourself off mute? And you put a few comments in the chat. Feel free to chip into the conversation with us, David, while I sort out this technical glitch that I've got. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, I put in a few comments there. I've been drawn into money laundering in Spain surrounding the entry of the euro. Deutsche Bank Pamplona actually forged my business account as an SIP, as an internet service provider. They inverted the payments in to the payments out and managed to get over, well, a couple of million pesetas out of it. I got involved in France, the Société Générale. Their director was accused of money laundering. I went to a business meeting in Caen in France, and the business manager there said, yes, but it was only one check. My area I've been drawn into since the death of my mother, without owning any property or debts to bequeath on trust. And the trust, the Tolata, with inside money laundering, which has been generated similar to the post office scandal by HSBC Bank itself. There was a manageress who was here in Cornwall. She was in Camborne, moved to Redruth and up to Truro. The bank account followed her. What she did in 2010 was offload all of De Vita Platt and other people. De Vita Platt were solicitors who were intervened by the Solicitors Regulation Authority. They came under the purview of the FCA through their whistleblower, certainly Emily Scott. And what happened was Chris Platt, who had his eventually, and John De Vita, his partner, had their licenses taken away by the Solicitors Regulation Authority Tribunal, but they were falsely accused by York City Council under POCA 2002 for being involved in another scam, the Alana Benson scam up in York. There were a group of 8 who were selling will estates to, what do you call them? I can't think, I speak more Spanish than English. The All People's Homes in York.
Yeah.
They didn't, but the York City Council didn't have the evidence, and in fact, Chris Platt was only involved for about a month. He has got away, and the issue I've got is basically here I've got malfeasance by the bank, HSBC Bank, and by the judiciary. Because actually, I've got a case where my sister has used, she hasn't gone offshore, she's used HSBC Bank with feeder accounts to plough funds, her own funds money laundering under POCA, under the amendments back in 2018. And as I've been saying, I don't find POCA very practical, because the actus reus under POCA come under section 327. It's the converting. Well, my sister has converted HSBC's interest into will estate account income through actually Birstall's solicitors up in Hull, their wills, probate and trusts department. I find, I've been shockingly,
it's a remarkable story though, David. It really is. I mean, the amount of moving parts you've got going on there is quite tragic. Well, if you don't mind, just summarize for me. What do you think the end result's going to be here? What do you think the final scenario is?
Well, I'm fighting to try, but I'm going against the establishment basically. I think it's become an establishment activity. I said I've been posting. I think it might go back to Theresa May, or even earlier, with the entry of the euro, which I got caught up in Spain. Basically, it was my daughter's godfather, who was doing the money laundering, but I didn't know he wanted my family, my business, and everything else to include in it. I got, my big frustration is I've been made bankrupt. I'm on pension credit, so I'm here, trying to, it's gone through the courts in England. Basically, it's gone from Truro County Court up to Wandsworth County Court, up to Hull Combined Court, back to Truro, up to the Appeals Court. Bristol High Court. The judge at Bristol, they forged the judgment. He's actually died. And the issue has been in the civil litigation system, the flimsy English, the flimsy legalese, disproportionate. Well, they don't come down to what I'm saying, to quantifying the proceeds of crime, the dirty money.
Your case, David, forgive me interrupting you. Your case is absolutely remarkable. I would really welcome the chance to better understand it, because it seems like within your one case you've got many of the different moving parts that seems to be so relevant for so many people. David, I'm going to move to Tristram and then to Nick for any comments they'd like to make in relation to what you've said. But whilst Tristram's thinking about how he's going to respond to the idea of responding to what you just said, I can see we've got Robert Hodgkinson. Robert, do you remember the other day when you kindly shared something for me that I couldn't share on my screen? Robert Hodgkinson, can you hear me? Can you see the item I just put in the chat, Robert, at 18:55? In a moment, I'm going to see whether you can share that on your screen and play it, because If possible, I'd like us to watch that. And it's the thing that I got a technical glitch on that means I can't show it myself. So I'll come back to you, Robert. In the meantime, get yourself ready to share that video clip that I've put in the chat. Tristram, any comments in relation to what David said? Thank you. First of all.
I mean, it's very difficult to comment on an individual case, and I obviously, feel a lot of sympathy for what David's been through.
Yeah.
Through the civil courts, and I think that's an issue really. My side of things is working through the criminal courts, and we had at the beginning of POCA we had very few resources. Then we had lots and lots of resources in that first decade. Then things changed in 2010, and I'm afraid that the resources going into policing have been radically changed. And I can't emphasize enough the radical nature of the change in the last 15 years. And the result of stripping out police forces and prosecution services and crown courts for ordinary crime impacts directly on financial and economic crime, because you can't undertake successful cases of the sort that David Ascott is describing unless it's built on a police service that has effective intelligence management, that can cope with financial intelligence from the financial sector and give it to accredited financial investigators. And those resources are precisely the ones which have been most damaged in the last 15 years. It's very difficult to talk about individual cases, and I can't offer solutions to those. So what I can describe is a general national failure to appreciate that the proceeds of crime and crime are intimately connected, and that our police forces, not just our national units, are the cornerstone of delivering the fight against fraud and other economic crimes like shoplifting and burglary and theft of legacies, if you like. Those can all be done at a local level, and we don't have the resources to do it.
Listen, thank you. We're going to go to Nicholas for any quick comments on that from Nicholas, and then we're going to go around and see if there are others that would like to chip into our conversation, if that's okay. Nicholas, anything to add to what Tristram has explained so far there?
Other than to say that, David, I sympathise with your the awkwardness of the case that you found yourself in, but unfortunately you're like many people around society today, where you've been drawn into something which is quite complicated and quite difficult for many people to understand, and that sometimes we really need to step back and actually say, what is it we're trying to find here? What is it we're trying to do? But the challenge becomes a lack of willingness and a lack of interest and a lack of knowledge. So yeah, David, I wish you the best of luck going forward.
Thank you, Nick. I'm going to invite a few folks to chip into the conversation. For example, some gentlemen don't think I've met before. We've got Michael Hnane, I think that may be how to pronounce your surname, Michael. We've got Kieran Maben. We've got Mike Grimsdale with us. Mike's a former old school bank manager. It'd be interesting to get his perspective on how things have got. We've got Drew Engel, we've got Toby, and others. So allow me, if I may, to draw you into the conversation. Toby, let's go to you first of all, then we go to Michael Loughnane, then to Kieran maybe. Toby, any initial thoughts that come front of mind to yourself, Toby, in relation to this topic of the war on dirty money? Please take yourself off mute, Toby, then Michael, then Kieran, then Mike Grimsdale. Toby, what would you like to say? Thank you. If you'd like to take yourself off mute, please, Toby, if you can. Thank you very much. Thank you. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, well, what I'd like to, underneath it all that sits why we have all the dirty money is actually, I think it's the money printing, because that money that's printed through quantitative easing has to go somewhere, and then that's where it ends up. That's so if we stopped a lot more of the money printing, there wouldn't be so much happening. That's my take on how to actually start to solve it.
That's really interesting. So the idea you've got there is that the more money there is pumping its way around the system, the greater the likelihood that some of it will get dirty and contaminated because you haven't got sufficient control over the money supply itself. That's a new thought. I think there's some logic to that, Toby. Thank you very, very much. The guys, Nick and Tristram might want to come back on these points later. Let's go. I can see that Robert Hodgkinson has very kindly got that piece ready for us. We'll come back to that shortly. Robert, good man. Thank you very much indeed. Why don't we go to Michael Name? Please introduce yourself, sir. Who are you? Where are you? And what are your thoughts on this topic of the war on dirty money, Michael?
Well, it's lovely to meet you all, and I enjoy the opportunity to thank you for the opportunity to speak. My own background, I was 27 years doing financial investigations, fraud cases in the United States.
Wow.
And then I became an instructor as a contractor in the intelligence community for about 10 years in counterterror finance. And I taught in the intelligence community under a contract with the Joint Military Intelligence Training Center. Then I formed my own little business, which now I do training, and this is to the point of the topic. For the last 9 years, I have been training mostly law enforcement in the area of financial crime and counterterror financial investigation. The comment that I have based on the topic is the challenge, and I'm US based. I have to put that as well, although I have many friends who are over on your side. But I say the challenge is, as I train now mainly at what we call state and local in the United States, is the lack of the expertise and the knowledge of the investigator to actually understand what it is that they're investigating. So be able to put the complexity of this type of case together to make it applicable, and that's both criminal and civil, is a major challenge. The expertise is drawn into the private sector where the money is there to pay for them. And it makes it difficult for that information because I believe, as Tristram said, the critical element there is what's the objective of banks and finance? It's a profit-driven entity. So when you do anything that draws away from the profitability, that's a challenge that has to be faced in the fact that how do they make decisions and how do they present, and where's the profitability in being honest? And that's often a challenge I think I have seen. So basically, I think the challenge here is that there is a lack of expertise. The expertise that does exist is almost, I don't want to say on the other side of the fence, but it is certainly in a colored environment that makes it difficult to make use of. And frankly, when I teach at state and local levels, the first reaction they have when I bring a financial crime of any type forward, it's, I'm going to send it up to the feds. Well, there's only so many FBI agents. There's only so many Treasury agents that, there's only so many that can handle the vast array of crime that, yeah, it is an open field because just the ability to be detected and then respond in an investigative environment makes it tough to do. So that would be my input. Thank you for the opportunity.
Michael, thank you. Great to have somebody with your expertise here. Do you know Nick and Tristram yourself? Do you know these guys? Do you know our authors?
I believe I've seen Tristram speak in the past. Nicholas, I don't know. But obviously I'm always open to meet new people.
It just seems, in all honesty, gentlemen, it seems like there'll be some great connections there. I'm sure you got some war stories you can compare with each other. So I'll ask my colleague Alexandra to introduce the three of you in by email. I think that'll be great. Thank you very much, Michael. What wonderful insights to have from you. We're going to go now to Kieran, then to Mike Grimsdale, then if he'd like to, then to Mr. Kenneth Barden. Kieran, please introduce yourself and tell us whatever's front of mind for you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Thanks for that great presentation. I'm a political theorist doing a postdoc at Yale and just interested in the problem of economic inequality. Rather than a comment, I really had a question for Tristram and Nicholas.
Yeah.
Based on your extensive experience with this, who did you find to be the most egregious violator of tax laws? Who is the dirtiest in your experience? And then maybe this is another kind of silly question, but if you had a magic wand that you could wave at this complicated problem, but it would only fix one element of it, what would you choose to point your magic wand at, and why?
Kieran, that's great input. Oh, fantastic input, Kieran. Thank you very much, sir. Nicholas, Tristram, over to you for your responses to that.
Well, I'm going to give the same answer to Michael and to Kieran, actually. And part of my role as the police lead in the UK was to introduce accredited financial investigators to police stations. So each police station in London had 4 financial investigators, and they worked as a team on the Proceeds of Crime Act. They had to work as a team because no one else in the police station knew how to operate that law. And they delivered financial investigation against local crime. So it wasn't transferred to the feds or the tax people or whoever. They had a team on the ground addressing local crime. And the team that I was leading in the centre was a regional multi-agency team composed of tax investigators, customs, serious organised crime agency, as was Trading Standards, City of London Police, Metropolitan Police, and I was in command of that, and I had a prosecutor to act as my legal advisor. He wasn't leading prosecutions. That's not how we work in the UK. So my answer to both of those questions is that the wand, if you like, the way forward is to recognise that if we train all the agencies to the same standard and have accredited financial investigators who all understand each other, then we can talk across the boundaries between agencies and the boundaries between countries.
Tristram, this is so interesting. The structure that you built there, which to my mind seems really sensible, you put the right expertise on the front line, deal with it locally. That just seems so sensible to me. Is that structure still there in London and elsewhere?
The regional asset recovery teams became part of the regional organised crime unit, and that's fine. So England and Wales is divided into 9 regions. They each have a regional team, and they actually, I think, they're your cutting edge. Better actually than the National Crime Agency, in my view, because they're closer to the front line. And they're specifically focused on asset recovery and organised crime, whereas the National Crime Agency is dealing with other things. For example, it has an economic crime unit, which is not necessarily dealing with financial investigation. I know that sounds perverse, but financial investigation as a technique is different from dealing with fraud as a crime type.
Thank you very much. I found that very interesting. So wow. Nick, anything you want to add to this?
Yeah, Michael's comment about finding staff who understand the topic and are willing to stay in, shall we say, less well-paid enterprises is always going to be a challenge. I guess anybody's always going to, well, 99% of people will follow where the money is. And that's a real challenge and a real letdown, because when it comes to investigations, you need people with the knowledge, you need people with the understanding. And I really worry there that actually we're spreading that problem out quite wide, in that we have a lack of detailed knowledge in every different area that we talk about, whether it's one side of the fence or the other side of the fence. And that's where it really leads on to Kieran's question around that magic wand. And for me, and I talk about it in the book, I actually think we need to go back to basics and give people the understanding of today's criminality. For the last 40 years nearly, we've been talking about different typologies and different ways that criminals will act. And I remember interviewing back in New Zealand a detective superintendent. Now, this was in 2016, 2017, when I worked in the Financial Intelligence Unit. And as a police officer, he was quite happy to talk about his investigations back in the late 90s. And he talked about them quite proud, and he talked about them how organised crime would deal with money laundering. But actually, that was 20 years before our discussion. Now, we know that criminality has moved on significantly. We know it's been driven by the way we've interacted as humans, about globalization, around the use of technology. And all that's had an impact upon how the criminal has gone from being a criminal that we can all spot to actually a member of the public. The argument is they hide in plain sight is never more true than it is now. And as a result, we seem to be living off our old understanding, trying to deal with today's problems. And of course, the knock-on effect is that we argue that money laundering is sophisticated because we're now delivering technology solutions which are sophisticated to match a sophisticated problem as a sort of justification for introducing things like artificial intelligence. But actually, money laundering is not sophisticated. And if we can instill that knowledge back into people and we can get them to think. Now, I was recently contacted by a media outfit who are global. And the question from the reporter at the time was, can you talk to me about crime script analysis? Now, if you're not aware about crime script analysis, it's quite simple. You script the crime process as it happened. And it originally came from criminologists who talked about it from a shoplifting perspective. But actually, crime script analysis is really helpful for us to understand just what is happening today when it comes to criminality. How are crimes being undertaken? And if we started to do that, and like Tristram said earlier on, the National Crime Agency and the Home Office in the UK are actually trying to draw out some of that information by their research questions that they've introduced, looking for academics to do that. They're trying to get an understanding of today's criminal practices. And that was essentially why my doctorate was written on money laundering types of high value portable commodities and cash intensive businesses. It's because the National Crime Agency, as it was then, which was a serious organised crime agency, and Tristram and I had these discussions, didn't understand how criminals were using those types of money laundering, those facilities. Now, if we can bring out that information and as deep and as wide as possible, we'll have a better understanding. So to answer your question, it comes down to the basic knowledge.
Fascinating stuff. Fascinating stuff. In a moment, folks, we're going to go to Mike Grimsdale, if that's okay, to get Mike Grimsdale's thoughts on these topic areas. But first, a couple of things. Number one, I'm going to attempt to share my screen and show you some data that you might find pretty interesting. And number two, I'm then going to ask Robert to see if he can play that video clip that I almost played earlier. But let me first of all share with you some data that I hope you'll find interesting. I'm going to go back to the beginning of this. Bear with me. There we go. All right, so share screen. This should work reasonably well. Many of you will know that there's a database called Violation Tracker. There's a UK version, a US version, and an international version. What we're looking at is the UK version, but you would follow the same process for the other databases as well. I'm very proud to be the chair of the Violation Tracker UK advisory board. I helped to bring it to the UK. You can search this thing in 1,000,001 ways. It's absolutely fantastic. One of the searches you can do, if you click on advanced search, as I've just done, you can then go to offence type. Go to offence type, which is here, and you click in there, and you can go to various kinds of searches, as you can see, bribery, etc., 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 foreign exchange, market manipulation, choose whatever you want. And what we can do now is go to the anti-money laundering deficiencies, because it's obviously relevant to this conversation. And we're going to click on search, and the database is going to show us the anti-money laundering infringements in this database. It's really good. The data in this database is from 2010 onwards. And what it's telling us is that the total amount of fines since 2010 is £1,036,661,481, 2,197 cases. What concerns me, folks, though, is the detail. First of all, what you get given is the worst offenders. So NatWest is the worst, then Deutsche, then Barclays, then Banco Santander, etc., etc. You can see that top 10 list. That's the naughty list. NatWest are on the top step of the naughty list, if you get my drift. What's really worrying is when you scroll down this list, which is the fines by size, NatWest at the top there, you start to see a pattern, which is recidivism. The same organizations being caught doing the same things over and over again, which is interesting because you would imagine that once a bank has been fined for anti-money laundering breaches, it would get its act together and sort out whatever went wrong. What you can also do with the database, if you click on the monetary amount, so for example, the top one here, NatWest in 2021, fined by UK FCA, that's the Financial Conduct Authority, obviously. If you click on the penalty amount, which is £264 million fine, you click on that, that takes us straight to a narrative, which is basically the details about this case. It says here, NatWest pleaded guilty to 3 offences of failing to comply with money laundering regulations by accepting £365 million in cheques and cash from commercial customer with suspicious behaviour that was not acted upon and was not spotted by an incorrect automated transaction monitoring system. And by the way, folks, what makes this such a powerful database is if you click where it says source of data, it immediately takes you to the official document that was the basis of the information that's been put into the data. So have a look at that data, folks, particularly if you have an interest in anti-money laundering, because it's quite startling, this pattern of recidivism where the banks are time and time again being caught not doing a good job in stopping dodgy money entering their accounts. I wonder why that might be, ladies and gentlemen. I wonder why. We're going to go to Mike Grimstad in a minute. After, we're going to go to Nicholas Gilmore. He just put his hand up. Nicholas, to you.
Yeah, look, I agree with those fines. I agree with the basis that those fines are for anti-money laundering regulatory failures. But you have to be mindful that whilst there is a failure, there is an equal there, a positive there, that if the bank is submitting SARS and STRs, that information which is not captured by that failure is a positive outcome of the AML compliance regime, in that that information goes into a national FIU database, which can then be drawn upon by law enforcement to progress, and Tristram's the expert in this, to progress a law enforcement investigation. However, the majority of those AML compliance regulatory failures are failures of failing to tick the box. They're not necessarily a failure to stop money laundering or a knowledge of money laundering happening. But when you look at many of those failures, it comes down to a lack of knowledge by the people involved to understand the risk of a customer, the risk of an action taking place, the likelihood of money laundering taking place. But we know that where there's an opportunity, money laundering will take place. But we never do a retrospective investigation on those people.
You know what? This is, forgive me, I didn't mean to speak over you just saying, Nicholas. But this is really interesting. I'll tell you what, the big thing coming out for me tonight is there seems to be a massive training need. Everybody in this anti-money laundering, war on dirty money space, a massive need to up everybody's skill set. We're going to go to Drew Engel. Great to have you with us, Drew. Again, I think you were with us last week, if I remember rightly. Yeah, you were. Drew, please do share your thought, and then we're going to go to Mike Grimsdale, the old school bank manager, as I like to characterize him. Then we'll try showing that video clip. Drew, please do tell us what you would like to say. Thank you.
Good evening, afternoon, morning to wherever one is. My name is Drew Engel. I'm an international attorney. I've been a criminal defense attorney and prosecutor in the U.S. I've been an international investigator and prosecutor in Europe, in Bosnia and Kosovo, and I've worked for the UN for a spell, and most recently I was working down in Liberia and West Africa. This conversation is really interesting to me, and I applaud a lot of the conversation from Nicholas and Michael about the need to have more knowledge sharing and expertise developed amongst investigators and prosecutors. But I think, and I have not heard this until now, maybe I missed it, so forgive me if I did. I think the judges need a serious upping of their game. I say that because as Andy was just going over the tracker and some of the statistics and some of the judgments and the like, one of the first thoughts that came to my mind is, yeah, the bank goes ahead and does a typical fine of the bank, or sorry, the judges do a typical fine of the bank and a naughty and don't do it again.
Yeah.
And some period of time goes by and then another violation occurs. But when it comes time to the actual persons being involved in this, sustaining a heavy hit, and with the bank being, let's say, debarred from doing certain kinds of business or something like that, I think that there's real room for improvement right there. If I was to sort of generalize from my prosecutorial experience and my investigation experience and in organized crime and money laundering and corruption matters overall, I would say there's probably been too much of attention paid to just fitting the facts to the elements of the crime, if that's possible, and probably not enough attention being paid to the money laundering aspects and where do the criminal assets go and things of that nature. And I thought Michael's comments were particularly interesting about things being kicked to the feds in the U.S. And right now, I think it's probably a fair statement to say, with all of the deregulation and lack of resources at the Department of Justice, if the headlines are to be believed, that's just seriously not there in terms of the interests at the federal level. And that's all the more reason, it seems to me, that the states and the like, at least in the states, U.S., they need to get their game on. But I'm particularly sensitive to these kinds of matters because I prosecuted a number of years in both Bosnia and Kosovo, as I said, and helped people in other jurisdictions. And it really fried me over and over again, the number of times that we brought really good cases and the tepid results that were achieved came at us. Or alternatively, we did great at the trial court level, but then at the appellate court level, things changed significantly. And, usually to the betterment of the accused. And I think that there's huge room for improvement at the judicial level, and that there needs to be more accountability up at that level. That's all I have.
Wow.
Great conversation, and thanks to everybody for this opportunity to share.
Drew, thank you again. Such remarkably helpful and valuable input. We got some superb experiences tonight. We really do. We really do. Drew, thank you so much. Folks, if anybody here tonight wants to be connected with anybody else, please just drop me an email or send Alexandra a note when she follows up tomorrow, and we'll happily try to oblige that. It's really nice to be able to connect people, especially from different parts of the world. I'm going to invite Robert to see if he can play that video clip, which only lasts about 40 seconds ago or so. And just as a reminder, it's a comedy program, a bunch of dodgy folks talking about setting up in business, basically to do fraud and related matters. Robert, give it a go, please. Can you try sharing your screen, please? Thank you. Mr. Mike Grimsdale, over to you, school. The old bank manager, forgive me, the old school bank manager. What do you have to say?
Also old now, but I mean, you've actually started touching on the points of local communities. I came from the traditional Lloyds Bank background, and I joined Trustee Savings Bank in the UK. Every single branch of every single bank, when they were in the community, knew everything that was going on. And there is no way the type of frauds that go on now exist. I've just sent some further information to another party, which I might like to send on to you, highlighting the fact that two of my very successful company business owners have tried to get up company accounts opened. It took them 6 months to do it. How is it that fraudsters have managed to transfer money illegally from an account that doesn't even exist in their name, and they get it transferred because somebody somewhere has to be underwriting the process? And at the end of the day, because everything is so automated through a centralized system, there is no local awareness whatsoever. And at the end of the day, the knowledge of the local crooks, fraudsters, etc., is completely gone. And that allows the ability of big processes to override. And yet the average person to open a bank account or to transfer money is completely investigated above a certain figure. And when I was actually a chief exec of a credit union for a period of time, I actually reported on a regular basis cash deposits of over £3,000 as required. And at the end of the day, you never know what happens. And I take Nicholas's point, and perhaps Tristram also said it. That does add up, but it isn't happening because the branches don't know what's going on. It's all done through an anonymity. So at the end of the day, the simple thing is trail the money. And it can't go other than in the system in the UK. It has to be going from a process. And I believe it's lack of local knowledge that's allowed this frauds to get worse and worse and worse. The international transfers, of course, have always occurred. But at the end of the day, it's still to follow the trail. So that's my point.
There's a recurring theme here tonight, isn't there, about doing things locally on the front line where you can. Mike, thank you very much. We're going to go to Ken Barden for any thoughts he'd like to chip into the conversation. Thank you for being with us, Ken. Then to anybody else who's itching to squeeze a point or two in, then we're going to go back to Tristram and Nick for their final comments. Mr. Ken Barden, thank you for being with us, sir. Would you like to share any thoughts? Thank you.
Sure. So to kind of introduce myself, I've been 27 years in AML work, mostly in international development. I've worked in over 40 countries and helped set up the FIUs in at least 6 of the countries, including Palau, Indonesia, Philippines, Palestine, where we actually seized money going to Hamas in 2011, $5 million. And so I have a lot of experience internationally, mostly in the Pacific region. I did have a comment earlier that I didn't raise at the time when there was discussion about whether people should be allowed to go from the industry to regulator and back. I agree there's a lot of vulnerabilities, but I would not completely have that as a hard and fast rule, because in working in some of these countries, there would be people who would train as government regulators, some people and others who would train in the industry, but they never talked to each other and they did not understand each other at all. So I think in under controlled environments, I think that exchange of skills can be beneficial. Obviously, you have to be cautious to avoid conflicts of interest, but there are benefits coming out of it. I guess my comment right now is, and given the world political stage, I think things are happening faster than we're going to be able to keep up. I've been doing some studies on the impact of tariffs on potential financial crime and money laundering. If you're familiar with the old VAT merry-go-round, tariffs are a wonderful opportunity to exploit that system. I mean, already in the United States, there's 15 and 25% tariffs being charged. The courts are dealing with how to deal with it. Some of the judges have been invalidating some of those tariffs. The president came out and said, well, if the courts invalidate the tariffs, they're going to be prepared to refund half of it. No direction as to where that money's coming back from. Most likely it will go back to whoever paid it. So wonderful opportunity for corrupt business people or whoever to load in to the valuation to pay the tariffs if they know they're going to get a significant amount of money back. And what better paycheck to show justification than one coming from the government. So I think that's one of the areas that we as professionals in this area have not really looked at yet. There's a lot of other trade deals and things like that. And the other thing is, I think things have kind of turned themselves topsy-turvy. I mean, in the US now, the FCPA is on suspension. So, it's hard to tell. It's almost like the criminals have taken over, to tell you the truth. And I don't know that we're prepared to know how to identify that and to get a step of that ahead of that to address it. Anyway, that's just my observations.
Ken, thank you very much indeed. I've just half tongue in cheek put a line in the chat there. Trump's tariff tornado turning everything topsy-turvy. There we go. There's a Guardian article about tariff tornadoes. It's really interesting you raised this point, Ken, tonight. Thank you. Is anybody else itching to come in with something before we go to Tristram and Nick for their final comments? I'll start bringing today's conversation to a close. Looks like we're good. We're good. Why don't we go to, we'll do it in reverse order. So Nick started. So let's now go to Tristram, and then we'll go to Nick for his very final words. Tristram, your final comments, so what are they?
Okay, 2 points. Thanks very much for the discussion, everybody. I just want to talk about Toby's point about printed money. The catalyst for change, using the Proceeds of Crime Act, was cash. And what that means is police officers were trained not to seize cash that they found during searches. Not to, because it created too much difficulty, because under the law prior to POCA, you had to prove beyond all reasonable doubt that that cash came from some kind of criminal activity. And it's an impossible task. That's the challenge that faces nearly all the countries in the world that don't have cash seizure. Their officers are trained not to seize cash. The Proceeds of Crime Act allowed us to suddenly seize hundreds of millions of pounds of cash in the UK. And at the moment, hundreds of millions of pounds of cash is left by police officers all over the world who are trained not to seize it because they don't have the legal framework to do so. Okay, so that's one little shock. How do we retain the skills of financial investigators? My answer is that we created these accredited financial investigators, everybody trained to the same standard. What we should do is pay them the same terms and conditions so that they can move between agencies, giving them a horizontal career path that will keep them going for years. People love doing this work. What they can't do is move agency, they can't move location because they're restricted. Also, there's no vertical career path, so there's nowhere for them to go to manage financial investigators. So if we create those career paths between agencies and upwards into management, then we can retain those skills. And maybe with the right safeguards, we could put those people into the private sector with a revolving door that goes both ways.
Thank you so much. There's a lot of food for thought here tonight. Really loads of it. Tristan, thank you so much. Nick Gilmore, your final thoughts, please, and then I'll bring our conversation to a close.
Yeah, I don't know how we managed to get this discussion into 90 minutes, to be honest, because there's so much to talk about. It's a massive problem with different aspects of it that actually need lots and lots of discussion around them. And I think that's one of the things that we don't tend to do. We don't tend to have these full and frank discussions about what we've been doing and what we should be doing and what we're going to do next. And I think a lot of people need to lose their egos and admit that if we start with a blank piece of paper and we map it out as it is today, and we look at the problem we're trying to deal with, we might come up with some completely different solutions, and solutions that actually do make a difference and make a difference straight away.
Fantastic. I can't quite believe we've squeezed as much in tonight as we have as well. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Tristram. We'll show our appreciation to our speakers, our authors of The War on Dirty Money in just a moment. My very final point really is going to be to draw your attention to something some of you have seen before if you've heard me talk, which is this wonderful, wonderful, wonderful quotation from Robert F. Kennedy. I'm particularly proud to refer to this tonight as we've got so many Americans here. So back in the 60s, when there was a sense of, I don't know, enlightenment, progression, the age of Aquarius, things seem to be very different then, and I think we are yearning for something similar all over again. But anyway, back in those black and white days, Robert F. Kennedy said, and I think this message is particularly aimed at people in a professional position where they are tempted to be looking the other way. You folks are the people that this particular message is aimed at. Please don't look the other way. Robert F. Kennedy. Every time we turn our heads the other way, when we see the law flouted, when we tolerate what we know to be wrong, when we close our eyes and ears to the corrupt because we are too busy or too frightened, when we fail to speak up and speak out, we strike a blow against freedom and decency and justice. Ladies and gentlemen, there are many parts of the world that are absolute hotspots when it comes to dirty money. My mum was Maltese. Malta's one of those hotspots. My dad was Greek Cypriot. Cyprus is one of those hotspots. So I personally feel really close to the desperate need to win this war on dirty money. I know what dirty money is doing to Malta. I know what dirty money is doing to Cyprus, and it ain't good. None of us want to live in a world that is dirty because it's contaminated with dirty money. We'll never have the society we want unless and until the war on dirty money is won. Can we please show our appreciation to Mr. Nicholas Gilmore and Mr. Tristram Hicks for a wonderful presentation tonight and a great conversation. Gentlemen, thank you very, very much indeed. Thank you all. We'll wrap it up there. We'll share the recording, put it out on social media, folks. Thank you all very, very much indeed. Tristram, Nicholas, thank you. Thank you very much.